angels waging war in the unseen realm. Global events fulfilling biblical prophecy. Eternal life. What lies beyond mortality? From analyzing the paranormal from a biblical worldview to the discussion of cutting-edge science and technology, conspiracy, discovery, special investigative reports. Unafraid to explore the challenging issues facing humanity. Welcome to another edition of Skywatch TV.
Hi folks, this is Tom Horn again, coming to you from the studios here in Missouri at Skywatch TV. And once again, so privileged to be able to have my good friend Steve QUayle in the studio with me. Hi, Steve.
Hey, Tom. It's really great to be back and to take the next series of amazing events and amazing fulfillments of prophecy and our mutual investigations and research expeditions going on concurrently, unknown to either one of us. The only time we find out what each other is doing is we do radio interviews together. So now we're beating that. We're doing a jump step. We're doing it on TV.
Yeah, but it makes me wonder what next is going to happen between the two of us. Maybe we'll talk about that in a moment with Timothy Alberino's project. We're going to be talking mostly today about this book that you put out recently called True Legends. And I love that title, by the way, because you know, we have these legends throughout the United States of America, throughout the world. Everybody seems to have their mythos, and yet there's such commonalities in the stories that were told that seem to attest to a time when there really were things that were going on in the world that involved giants and things like that. So we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But first, speaking of giants, I learned recently that Timothy Alberino, who is your partner in crime, your partner in filmmaking, he's been producing a whole lot of just world-class, like mini documentaries that you guys are putting up.
That's a good word.
What's the name of your film company?
Gen 6, short for Genesis 6 Productions. Yeah. And you know, thanks for bringing it up, because Tim just got back. Today's, what, the 21st, 22nd of, what month is this, April?
All right.
Yeah, you know, I keep strange hours, but Tim just got back from a 3-week trip to Peru, and we had a fascinating series of events that happened, and obviously Skywatch will be airing it. But what we're up to pretty much, Tom, is we're tracking down the giant cover-up that's taking place on multiple continents, multiple cultures, and I think I can explain to people the number one question that the doubters and the skeptics have. Well, where are all the skeletons? Well, Tim just returned from Peru, and fascinating, he was at Tiwanaku, he was in Bolivia, and he said in Bolivia they're undertaking a new dig, and the Bolivians just announced a whole new pyramid find. And what's fascinating is no matter where Tim has been in the last 3 months, Sardinia, obviously in Europe, Peru, Bolivia, and a couple points in between, the fascinating thing is, number one, they're always followed. Number two, everybody they interview, that's, let's say, over 75 years to 80 years, has a common, if you will, statement of who comes in to grab all the artifacts, especially when it's giant-related. They're talking about helicopters landing at night. They're talking about big helicopters lifting very heavy items. And in Peru, for instance, one of the amazing things at a place called Sacsayama, I'm probably not pronouncing it right, but the fascinating thing is that they ran into an engineer who is a secular engineer that said the ancients had to have had a way to liquefy the stone, because the stone in some instances flows in and pours in together, just like you and I, you know, playing with Play-Doh, fitting piece A to piece B. Now, this is a secular engineer. But fascinatingly enough, that every place that Tim went, they were followed most of the time. It didn't matter if it was in Sardinia. The hush-hush, there were people that were actually afraid to go on camera. We had many times we could only record their voice because they were afraid of them. And interesting, them was the Vatican. Well, obviously, if anybody knows the history, and you well know, but of South America, Latin America, and even different parts of Europe, there's a absolute stranglehold on true artifacts and true history. But what was mind-blowing to both of us, and even the people that accompanied, whether they were translators, a film crew, is just how touchy anybody was for filming. It was okay if you filmed on the right hand, but don't go over on the left hand. The right hand was like I would call staged artifact. Some of the most famous artifacts you see on the Ancient Alien series and all the different, they've been moved from a place where they really made sense to a place where they don't make sense. Tim said an interesting thing. Tim said it was like, Steve, you could see the pre-flood building and you could see the post-flood building. They'll let you see all the post-flood building you want, but they won't let you see the pre-flood stuff. In Bolivia, they were met by armed guards carrying machine guns. So that's what we're up against. Now, this is important, Tom, for your research too. There are people working overtime to keep the truth of what is really out there in true history. I said in an earlier interview, they who control the past determine the future. If you and I are only told 3 points on a 12-point instruction to follow, we don't do good after maybe 4 or 5. We're going to mess it up. So by keeping people in this state of, I would call, I've got to be really careful here, I call mainstream media vomit brokers, okay? So by them only giving...
And that's being careful.
That's being careful. That's the best I can do. You know, either that or I have a mouthful of soap. The point being is that they want to regurgitate some facts, but most fiction, into the narrative, whether it's anything that you and I talk about collectively. Yet when you go to the desert Southwest, you and Chris go down there, Chris Putnam, or Tim's going here, or I'm going to a Native American reservation, you'll find out that there's a whole different world out there that these people who lived and their ancestors chronicled it, and people absolutely see the Norway spiral, but they can't accept the fact that, gee, how did the Native Americans, or how did 4,000-year-old civilizations, why do they all use the universal symbol?
Right.
And
but now this is also part of a documentary or a series of documentaries.
Series of documentaries.
So tell me about that. What you're doing, of course, is kind of producing documentation and in documentary format of a lot of stuff that you already have been investigating for some time on the presence of giants, but also even like you talk about Amaruca, if I'm saying it right, like the whole origin of how America got its name. And the Freemasons even write about this, don't they? Talking about where the knowledge of the mystical schools came from. Here, as it came from the plumed serpents? The
plumed serpent, Quetzalcoatl, Viracocha, both in the Aztec and Mayan history. The plumed serpent, Amaruca, or Ameruca. That's what the South American and the high cultures called America, and that's land of the plumed serpent. Now, when you see pictures of Quetzalcoatl, you know the classic representation is a feathered serpent. Almost looks like basically the reptilians in the old science fiction movie V with a whole bunch of feathers. I know that's simplistic, but that's what it is. So by finding out where all of these customs that came in the United States. There was a time, for instance, where people, even the major anthropology magazines, never wanted to admit that the Native Americans necessarily in the desert Southwest were cannibals. I remember fighting that argument 40 years ago. So the point being now is, or the Anasazi, the ancient ones, which you and Chris, have talked, or the alien ones. What is the central theme in all these, by the way, is cannibalism. Now what we're seeing in the headlines is cannibalism. You're seeing it in all shapes and forms, whether it's the Christian, our brethren in Syria being slaughtered and basically cannibalized, their meat sold for meat in the market, and the world, especially the Western church, is silent. That makes me just go, I said this, the customs of the ancient ones will come into the contemporary times, and you'll know we're in the end times. And that's exactly, now, there was very little cannibalism 20 years ago. Maybe the case of the airliner that went down in the Andes, and situation survival. But there was never, basically cookbooks on the internet and people advertising for people to come and basically let someone kill them, as in the case of Germany, and eat them.
It's interesting because, you mentioned me and Chris had been doing, again, doing investigative work, not even knowing you were working on this brand new book, True Legends, where you're taking the stories that had been told by many of the American Indian tribes and the legends of the stories. I want to ask you in a few moments about the Smithsonian. Don't let me forget to ask you about that. But while you were doing that, we were actually going to the Four Corners area. Chris went down to the, to the southern end of the Anasazi Trail, as I started calling it, in Sedona. And what does he find there in Sedona but the presence of the Vatican, had built, and in an area where nobody else is allowed to build. They get to build this kind of Catholic thing. It's a church. It's a monastery sticking out of the side of the mountain. We found the same thing on the top of Mount Graham. Everywhere there seems to be these portals and these entities, it's like there's a very strong presence there, as if they know something we don't know, or they're pursuing something ahead of us. But the point I was going to make is I got a chance to sit down with Dr. Don Mose. And he's a third-generation medicine man. He's an academic, or he's a retired academic in the Navajo Nation. I should have brought his book and showed it to you, where he had an artist depict giants that used to be in the United States. Some of them that look like they're 200 feet tall. It took whole tribes to bring them down. And when they finally got them down and cut their head off, there was so much blood that came out, it flowed down into the valley like it was forming a small river. This is in the books that he had written. Well, here's the interesting thing. I'm interviewing him, and I ask him, so tell us, what happened to the Anasazi? And he starts, telling the tale that they hear in school. Well, there was a drought, and then 7 years of a drought, they follow, they start migrating slowly away. But I raised questions about that. I said, and yet when the archaeologists first went into those cliff dwellings, they found that they had disappeared overnight. They didn't slowly migrate away. They left everything, bags of salt that would have been like gold, right? So where did they go? Well, he looks at the camera. We have this on film. And he says, well, I shouldn't tell you this, but if you were to ask my great-grandfather, this is a story that he would have told. And Steve, it was like he had opened up True Legends and started reading, because he talks of a portal, the serpent deceiver that comes through the portal, the six-toed giants. But he also says that this deceiver started teaching the people cannibalism. That was my whole point. They started eating one another. The giants were eating them. We did follow-up research that isn't even in our book, where we found old university archaeological digs where they found Anasazi that had literally been ripped apart. They found their bones, the sinew, the flesh had been literally ripped apart and left on the ground.
The rib cage is split.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny you would say that, Tom, because, again, this illustrates it. In the book Long Walkers, a pilot who was an active-duty Air Force pilot flew into Bagram Air Force Base, I believe, in the year 2005. And I know him personally, came to my store, bona fides, verified, etc., and told the story. Now, you just talked about being ripped apart. Well, he was tasked with flying a dead giant who had cannibalized a squad of Marines that were going in looking for bin Laden's boys, Al-Qaeda in the caves and everything. And interestingly enough, the very description that was given to the team that basically produced the giant cadaver for him, and takes a special way of killing giants, he said it was like their rib cages were ripped apart. Isn't that interesting? So you're in the desert Southwest talking to that very intelligent man, and his grandfather, I would tell you this, would know more about the truth than all the twisting.
Well, Dr. Mose is a third-generation Navajo Nation medicine man and oral historian whose books are used in their schools. So, yeah, he's no Johnny-come-lately.
I think the big discrepancy between fact and fantasy is that as the older generation dies off, this is why Tim, he's sitting on a reed island in Lake Titicaca, okay? And he's interviewing I think is like a 75 or 80-year-old man who only speaks the language that has to be translated into Spanish. Now, Tim speaks perfect Spanish and lived in Peru, so that helps. But it's always the same story. So they're talking about the helicopters coming in, talking about cannibalistic giants, and how's this for an interesting story? They go to a place called Amaramuru, which is a Stargate location, actual Stargate. So they have shamans there, and they're ringing a bell, and they're taking like a metal object and like you would take your thumb and make a crystal glass hum. They're basically making all these different noises. Now, I've been told by the people that know a lot about this stuff that stargates work on words, sounds, and a power source. I never found out what the power source was. But while Tim, Vinny, and Benny, those are the three guys in the crew, are camped out at the Stargate, it rains, it hails. They've got this on video. And he said it was the most strangest thing they've ever seen, because around them, everything was clear. But right where they were was, if you will, this directed hailstorm. He said it was so furious that they had to go and get half the village to come and pull their car out and dig their car out of the mud, because, basically they had gone up there to see this event. But the strangest lightning, the strangest sound. So what am I saying here? I'm saying that in your findings and our corollary investigation research, the common denominators are always the same. I think I've told you this before, I mentioned it on the radio. I was contacted by a major film studio years ago, 3 or 4, maybe 5 years ago, and they wanted to know if I would be willing to make the Giants rewrite a movie script that I had written, and, basically making the Giants nice people. And I said, fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Doesn't sound to me like they're eating burgers, okay? Right. So the point being is that even Shrek, there was a cartoon, and they made Shrek. An ogre is a human-eating monster, O-G-R-E. Yeah, not Congress, because there's some of those guys too. Those just eat the fruit of the land. But the point being is that we're seeing now in the corollary investigations that we're doing, the common denominators. And the Anasazi, it's fascinating. You jump to Easter Island now, and Easter Island used to have a curse, and the curse was, your grandmother's flesh lies rotting in my teeth. Lovely, huh? That was a National Geographic. So there's been a cover-up, because, again, what's troubling to me is that I see the parasitical appetite of demons coming into common acceptance. I don't play video games. I can honestly say I don't think I've ever played one more than 2 minutes, and then my attention span was over, and my manual dexterity is not what it used to be. I was teasing you about Joe. I love the way he plays the guitar. Yeah. My thumbs and fingers don't move that fast anymore. But the thing that's fascinating to me is that the theme in these video games is getting darker and darker. Do you know what the #1 selling comic book and cartoon series is in Japan? It's about man-eating giants, okay? And these are like 200-foot tall giants. So when you asked me earlier what's the difference about this Genesis 6 revised volume versus the first one I wrote, is the Woods document. They're 200, 300, 400-foot giants, especially Polyphemus. That goes right back to the Cyclops. That goes right back to Jason the Argonauts. It goes right back. And the Greeks, for instance, one of the, two ancient wonders of the world was, good night, the Colossus of Rhodes. That was that was 99 feet, and it spanned the harbor. Then you have the Temple of Zeus, which is kind of a portrayal on Genesis 6 giants, and that was a real temple where real giants sat. And held court. And these guys were in their 40 and 50 and 60 foot tall. So, Paul Bunyan and all those stories may have been dismissed when you found out from your Native American contact, and I'm hearing the same thing from my contacts around the world, because when you and I go on talk radio, it goes all over the world, and millions of people listen, and we'll hear from Australia, we'll hear from Siberia, we'll hear from all over the place. I mean, I've heard people say, we listen to you on satellite radio. And I said, you mean like Sirius? He said, oh, no, we're on satellite. We're getting you from the satellite downlink. So they must be in some research facility or have some capability. But those are the kind of people that make contact with us to give us the leads we follow up. And so I think it's time, I refer to this over and over, it's time for those hidden things to be revealed. And again, the people of God have nothing to fear. Now, if they know what's coming and we're articulating it, defining it, and preparing them for it, then they will deal with it in victory versus in subterfuge, defeat, and total panic.
We've been talking here with my good friend Steve QUayle. You can see why I love talking to Steve, right? How do you do this with no notes? I mean, you have a mind like a steel trap. Right now, we've been talking about the book True Legends, and this is one of your newest books. This just only came out just a few months ago.
No, that one came out about a year ago.
About 1 year ago.
Yeah, Little Creatures about 6 months ago.
Actually, this is even newer than that, isn't it?
That's new. That's like 2 weeks old.
Little Creatures, and then Genesis 6 Giants. This is actually the what is this, a third edition, or it's your new edition? It's an expanded?
New edition, but if it were going by the old line, it would be the 10th printing of it.
Okay. So, but we're making all three of Steve QUayle's books available to you at a very special price. We're also throwing in we typically retail this for $30, Volume 1 of the Researcher's Library of Ancient Texts. This is the Apocrypha, but it has many of the books that you'll find sourced in Steve's books, like the Book of Enoch and some of the other ancient works like Jubilees, which also talks about the giants, also talks about the return of the giants and the fallen angels. Normally, these books all sell for $40 each because they're 2 to 3 times as big as anybody else's works. That would normally, between those 3 books and the Apocrypha, that would be $150 value, but we are making that available to you during these programs only for a special price of $99. If you call in the number that's on the screen, or if you visit skywatchtv.com, you will be able to get these books from our online store. If you call in, just tell them that you're looking for the Steve QUayle package, the Steve QUayle special, and you'll get all of those books for the special price of $99. Of course, we have each one of these available in the store for sale by themselves. If you want to buy just Genesis 6 Giants or the new Little Creatures book, I'm sure that we'd be happy to make those available to them too. Well, Steve, we've got about 5 minutes left here, and there's a question I just keep wanting to get to.
Let's go for it.
And it's the question of the Smithsonian. In your book, right towards the very beginning of True Legends, you tell a story that some people are familiar with, probably most people are not familiar with. Some people just call this the Great Smithsonian Cover-Up. Tell me about that.
Well, first of all, the Smithsonian was basically founded by a man named Smithson, obviously where you get the name Smithsonian, and he hired a gentleman named Powell, for instance, who was a pretty well-known expedition leader. Lake Powell is named after him, but he became the curator. He suffered from a thing called isolationism. He wouldn't allow the thought that there were other civilizations and or people that had the ability to, number one, travel by ship. He thought that everybody grew up in an isolated area, and some people call that isolationism. Some people call it uniformitarianism, but that's as opposed to diffusionism, where everybody went everywhere. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to remind people that the Smithsonian, from its very beginning, had the official party line that was pretty much established by Powell. And he would not allow any conflicting evidence, although I do quote in there, there's one quote of his that basically says, I can't account for this stuff outside of, a more advanced civilization and culture having generated it. In other words, he denies everything until the very end, and then he says, but I can't account for it. Everyone is familiar with the classic scene in the Raiders of the Lost Ark, where obviously at the end, after the Nazis and after the retaking of the Ark, and it's put into a crate and it's being taken down this massive, huge warehouse on a forklift and just placed in some indiscriminate spot in the warehouse out of the eyes of everyone to see. The reason the giant bones, now here's the bottom, here is I would say the definitive statement. The reason the Smithsonian does not allow the truth to come out on this is because giants would indicate that the biblical narrative is accurate and would totally undermine Darwinian evolution, okay? And if you know the history of anthropology, there are times when the anthropologists believe that the Piltdown Man and some of the Peking men and all these anthropological supposed species that existed, they had the jawbone of something, and they built a whole mythological creature around it. Well, if they can believe a lie then and perpetuate that lie and then only grudgingly admit it was false, what makes us think that they're telling the truth about anything? Good example. We're now seeing NASA. There was never water on the moon. Now there's once water on the moon. Mm-hmm. There was never water on Mars, yet they're finding there was water on Mars, We're seeing all these hints, and you and I have talked about it, the alien agenda. Here's what's key. In every area that you and I have investigated or will investigate, wherever there's a military base, Tom, wherever there's a Catholic presence heavy, those are mystical, and there are also electromagnetic contact points like Sedona. Good night. They consider that one of the most important vortexes or power centers between dimensions in the world. Well, that's what Timothy Alberino and the film crew were down in Peru, all over Peru, basically tracking down. And I would say this, if you go out and it's a bright blue sky, you camp out in front of a known Stargate, and all of a sudden you've got an isolated weather war against you. Obviously somebody or something was not happy with the presence. I won't say it's a supernatural thing, but it's certainly an unusual thing, and even the natives couldn't figure that one out.
Yeah, and deities try to emulate God, so that how Israel in the Old Testament would follow God, and they would follow the cloud, right?
Correct.
God created what we could almost explain in chemistry, but he did it miraculously so that they would follow it. And the demons always try to emulate him. They always try to be like he is. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will be like the Most High. This is what they want, right? They
Absolutely.
want to be worshipped as gods. So it'd make great sense. In fact, in True Legends, you talk about the storm gods, and so there's mythology and storyline that go around that whole concept since forever that would make you then wonder. Timothy goes down. He's with a group of people. He's in an area that's supposed to be a portal. Beautiful weather all over the place, and a storm just decides to come right over the top of them and have a hissy fit because they are there. Of course, electromagnetism. They can read that in the ground. Like you mentioned, Sedona, it's off the chart. And that, of course, can also play a role in our weather patterns. We've only got 45 seconds left in this program, so I'm just going to have to beg you if you can at least come back one more time. We thought we would do 2 shows, then 3. I think we're going to have a 4th show, if you will.
I'll do it.
Okay. Folks, once again, wonderful being here on the set at Skywatch TV with my good friend Steve QUayle. You would think that with all of the years and hundreds of hours of radio that you and I have done together, that we would have been in each other's presence before. But this is actually the first time that we've sat down next to each other, and this time I couldn't be happier to have him. And when the Timothy Alberino, Steve QUayle Gen 6 products become available, you'll see them here.
The supernatural realm is real, and we humans are naturally curious about it. That's why there are so many television reality shows featuring ghost hunters and alien chasers and mediums and psychics. Well, by and large, the Christian church avoids these controversial topics, even though we have the authoritative book on the subject. That's our mission at Skywatch TV, is to address issues of the paranormal and the supernatural from a Christian, a biblical perspective. But we depend on your support to do it. To find out how you can support Skywatch TV prayerfully and financially, please log on to our website, skywatchtv.com. And keep watching as we keep watch at Skywatch TV.